Hey folks, it's Sam. I'm doing an update today on the upcoming eclipses that will be happening on November 19th and then in early December. And these eclipses are happening in the sign of Taurus and in the sign of Scorpio. So it's going to be very interesting and transformative eclipses, one where the moon is exalted, one where the moon is debilitated. And so you'll want to know about this. Very important. Now, I talked about this as part of a cycle that was covered in my end of the year astrology free web class. I just put the link, I dropped the link in the comments, and I'll have the link in the comments below this video. If you haven't seen it yet, you should check it out. It's to show what's coming up for the end of the year, of course. Several shifts. There's a Mars combustion, which is going to continue. Mars is also going to go into Scorpio in early December, right before the eclipse happens. Then, of course, it's the eclipse. We also have other shifts that have just happened, so it can help you really understand what's going on with that, as well as Jupiter is going to be moving into Aquarius. So again, sometimes these, some of the shifts have already happened, but they've just been recent, so it can help you understand where you've just been. But it also shows where we're going and puts these things in a larger context. So you're invited to check that out as well. Again, it's free. It's just a way for me to, go in more depth. It's actually more than an hour. So check that out to really get an overview of these important shifts. So you see, this is the chart right here of the upcoming lunar eclipse. Now, this is happening on November 19th, 2021. And it's, very early in the morning here in San Diego, which is where I'm living. So you might, it's actually the 19th. It's probably set as the 18th in some places, especially, or no, it would be the 19th. Sorry, I get my time zones screwed up. But I know exactly when it's happening because you notice when the moon is opposite the sun. That's how you know it's a lunar eclipse. So we have eclipses each month when the sun joins the lunar node. So you see the sun is very close to K2, the south node here. And then when we have the full moon of that month, when the moon joins the node, that's when we have the eclipses. And we'll have a lunar eclipse first. Then 2 weeks later, when the moon joins the sun in Scorpio, we'll have the solar eclipse. So again, the nodal axis, the lunar nodes, are the ecliptic. It's the intersecting point of the sun, moon, and Earth in three-dimensional space. And so again, when these three bodies, the sun, moon, and Earth, when their orbits intersect, then again, the moon moves in between the sun and the Earth. And then when we have the the lunar eclipse, like we're about to have, the moon moves in between the sun and the Earth. So again, these three objects, which have nothing to do with each other, they're just moving. They're moving completely independent of each other. But it's about a day each year for the total duration of about approximately 1 day out of a 365 and a quarter day year. The luminaries are all kind of aligned, right? Because the solar eclipses usually last a couple hours. We have a couple of them. And then the lunar eclipses are longer in duration, but they're not as intense. And they usually last, 8 to 10 hours or something like that. So with the most intensity being about 2 hours or something like that. So it's the thing to understand about eclipses is that they're not rare, but they're still don't happen that often, which means they happen regularly. I should say it like this. They happen regularly, but they're still rare. So we know when they're going to happen, and we know they're going to happen, but they still don't happen that often when the sun, moon, and Earth all line up and converge in three-dimensional space. And the thing I said earlier is something you should really understand. You should try to understand, because we overlook the sort of miracle of existence that we're just kind of living in. We're standing on a rock, and by the way, it's round, This is one of the best examples where we can prove that the Earth is round, by the way, for those who think the Earth is flat. Explain eclipses. You can't, okay? Just to cut to the chase, you can't. The Earth and the sun and moon hovering above a flat disk cannot explain eclipses. Just a quick answer. Perfectly explained with three round objects circling, but you have to understand they have nothing to do with each other, because the Earth is circling the sun, and that creates one circle, and the moon is circling the Earth. That's creating another circle. So again, but they have nothing to do with each other. Their movements are totally independent. Yet they've managed to synchronize every, again, approximately 180 days or some version of that a couple times a year, and their orbits all line up literally in perfect alignment. So that's what eclipses are. Now you have to understand that the sun, moon, and earth, these are the three aspects of consciousness and of karma and of creation. The sun is the soul, what's called the Paramatman, or the supreme self. Again, your connection to the sun, to your sun, is as what's called an Atma, or a divine being, which is not necessarily a being of karma, but a being of dharma and of transcendence. So you as a transcendent being, you as an Atma, is related to the sun. And that's the part of you that's always trying to illuminate your true self beyond this world of time, feeling, karma, and all of that. That Atma of you is joined what's called the Param Atma, which is the soul and the self of all. That's why they say we're all one, all of the oneness, where the same light in you is the light in me. That's on the level of the Paramatma, right? So the sun is the part of you that is of supreme light, without a shadow, right? Once we incarnate, though, you've incarnated because you have karma, you have feeling, you have desire, and you don't know yourself as an Atma. You think you're an ego. You think you're a separate being. And that illusion of separateness has compelled you to incarnate and do a bunch of stuff so that you can evolve beyond that illusion, that you're just a limited being of limited intelligence, emotion, time, all of that, power. And that's related to the moon, that consciousness or that awareness or that feeling, that emotion that attaches you to this experience, that all of this stuff you're doing through the body. By the way, the body is related to the earth. Literally, it's not just related to it, it comes from the earth, right? The mind doesn't come from the earth. The manas, the mind, the moon, is called the jiva atman. And the jiva is the part of you that goes from lifetime to lifetime. This is why all the karmas are in the mind. They're in the moon. Especially Vedic astrology, when we're reading Vimshotri Dasha, we're reading the karmas in the mind, in the moon. They're not in the body, right? They compel the body, but the body is related to the earth, because that's where you've incarnated, and it's going to die, and the body's going to die and go back to the earth. Body belongs to the earth, not to you. Not only does it not belong to you, we've not only lost the knowledge that the body doesn't belong to us, but to us, the body is us. So just be honest, you are living through the body. If you say you're not, let me do something to the body and watch you go, no, that's me, I'm the body. Nothing wrong with that. I'm the same way, right? So we have this attachment to this separateness, and that's what creates all the stress in life. So sun, moon, and earth are the three main components of incarnation, of karma, of life, as we know it through the body. And what eclipses do is these orbits of these three planets line up, again, in three-dimensional space at specific moments in time and kind of blast us out of the normal matrix. Because this is the Matrix. Again, the Matrix was a movie. Everyone's like, oh, the Matrix. It's really the Matrix. We're really living in the Matrix. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. Nothing new. Been that way a long time. Yeah, it's a Matrix. Not a computer simulated program. It's your projections of this illusion that you're this body, mind being. Okay, beyond that is the actual truth, which is beyond the matrix. And the closest connection astrologically to those things that we all have are the lunar nodes, the nodal axis. And when someone has very prominent nodes in their astrology chart, they often live very outside of the matrix. They're often very aware of things that are outside of the normal body-mind structure, body-mind complex, body-mind ego complex. But it's often hard to manage, because there are things that just sort of come to us that are, some of them are intuition, some of them come from past lives, some of them are future lives, things that haven't happened yet, things that did happen, but for some reason they're kind of invading our space now. Again, this is what the nodal axis is. It's this part of us that's not just hooked into this time, place, and person, right? And so when we have eclipses, that aspect of consciousness, of awareness, becomes very prominent, particularly with people do have, again, like I say, prominent nodes. Someone said, what's prominent nodes? They often just in a very prominent place or joined a lot of planets, for example, then they're going to be very active. If they're, that's one of the main things is when the nodes join a lot of planets, then it really activates the quality of those planets that are not necessarily of this earth. That's what the nodes do. They expand things beyond just the worldly function of that energy, right? And so not a judgment as to good or bad, because you have to look at the dignities of the planets involved and all of the important evaluation protocols in Vedic astrology to be able to tell whether or not they're beneficial or detrimental, or how beneficial or how detrimental they are and whatnot. So often I have definitely shifted my perspective away from seeing the lunar nodes as necessarily being malefics. I talk about the things they do that are disruptive. They're certainly disruptive, but they're also really where enormous perception comes. Sometimes it can be very disruptive, though, and it can be very toxic, and it can be the most extreme kind of crazy, unconscious thing in the world. It's always going to have a quality of that, but if the planets that are joined, or if their rulers are powerful, or something like that, then the confusion that the nodes bring, because that's the main thing you can say about both ends of the node. They both bring confusion, different kinds of confusion, which I don't have time to talk about. I've taught extensively on this. You can go to my website and get classes I've taught just on how to evaluate the lunar nodes and how to understand them. But the main thing we can know is that they bring confusion. Rahu is a confusion and an anxiety about what we feel like we're here to do, but I want to accomplish this, but I haven't done this yet. And we get anxious because we're trying to learn about something that we haven't learned so much yet. So that creates an anxiety. And K2 is kind of anxiety about the past and maybe regrets and things that we feel like we should be better at. I should be an expert at this. I should be perfect at this, right? And it creates stress about not being perfect. So one is very much about the past and a kind of mastery where we've already been, but we feel like we should be better. And another is an anxiety about the future where we're not really sure what that thing is, etc. The other thing I should say is that as we get older, the nodal axis calms down and all of that anxiety calms down as well, right? So just in a general sense, this is what we're looking at when we're looking at the lunar nodes and when we're looking at eclipses, this whole kind of matrix of body, mind, spirit, of the sun, which is our Atma self, our transcendent self, how that feels in our mind through all of our lifetimes, as our soul has developed through all the lifetimes, all the karmas, which are in the moon, all of our karmas arrive in the form of our emotions and our samskaras. This is why it feels real when something is happening. And your karma is really all of your feelings and emotions and tendencies to see things a certain way and to mainly feel about life the way you feel about it. It's really not that complicated. That's what that karma has been going around from lifetime to lifetime. And this is how we're evolving. This is how our karma feels real, because your emotions and feelings feel real to you. That's because of the moon. So again, when the moon gets eclipsed, like it's going to be eclipsed, that part of you that feels very attached to how you feel, and that, no, this is really me, and these emotions I have, and these feelings that I'm this person who had this childhood, and I had this thing, and all this stuff was done, and these emotions are real, and all the stuff that we do, and they are real, and all of that, but all the stuff that we've now built up around all of these attachments to our story as a being who is really having all these feelings, and that's really who I am, and blah, 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 all of that gets blown up, thrown into a sort of chaotic nature, where again you can you'll it's an opportunity to really question all of that, to really question all of that attachment, all the emotional attachment, to be able to have all those feelings because they're real, but to see them with more detachment, with more intelligence, to be more playful, to really question the whole, really to question the matrix, to question this universe and these preconceptions that you find yourself falling into and buying into. That you're, again, one of the main things with the moon has to do literally with your upbringing, again, your emotions and your feelings, but the source of that's just the momentary kind of bubbling up. What the origin of all that is, again, your childhood, your past, your memories, your emotions, your comfort zone, and questioning all of that, and how much attachment you have to all of that. Think of how much your whole life revolves around that to some extent. You want to feel good, and anything that you think is going to make you feel good, you're interested in. If you think something's going to make you feel bad, you don't want anything to do with it. Again, it's like, well, of course. Well, yeah, but that's the moon. And that's not necessarily the best thing to base your whole life on. In case you haven't thought about it this way. Wanting to feel good all the time is not really the best way to live your life, because many things that are going to lead you to the next level of your awareness and growth aren't necessarily going to feel good in the moment. Doesn't necessarily feel good to, again, do a lot of spiritual practice and do all this kind of stuff. Like, let's say something like, something that feels that is, one of the best things you can do. Let's say for your health, your physical health, your physical body. Are you always doing the things that make you healthiest? You know what they are, but do you do it? No, that's not going to feel good right now. I don't think I'll take an ice bath tonight. I think I'll pass on the ice bath. I think I'll take a nice bubble bath with candles and nice scented oils, and that'll feel good. By the way, that's great. Self-care. All we do is self-care. Is it, I'm going to eat the food that I know is going to make me strong, but it's going to be, less than I really want. Instead of the comfort food. See, the problem isn't that we do things to feel good. It's that that's all we do most of the time. And so this is where the moon, especially moon areas, we can just stay stuck in a kind of habit, comfort zone, right? So this lunar eclipse in Taurus, this is really powerful because this is extremely, this is an exalted lunar eclipse. So not only are we getting that kind of blowing things up beyond our strong bias to want to feel good all the time, which is what the moon is. And by the way, this is why eclipses and full moons in general are stressful, because even when we have a full moon, we're kind of full of all of that. So lunar eclipses happen on a full moon where we're full of our emotional whatever it is. So we get very full of all of that on a full moon. So you're going to feel very full of it on the eclipse. And again, it's in Taurus where it's very stable, but the nakshatra is Kritikka. This is like the highest exalted place of the moon, because Kritikka literally means the cutter. The symbol is like a razor, like a straight razor, or you could even say like a meat cleaver or something where we cut things, where things are cut off. And what it's really showing is that the exaltation point, and where the moon is the most exalted, is it's in the sign of Taurus, where it's stable, where we can sit with things, where we have patience, where we have what's called santosha, or contentment, where we're happy with whatever is there, where we have gratitude, patience, fulfillment, where we feel fulfilled, which is Taurus. But there's also a cutting quality, so that when we're not restless anymore and we can just rest in the moment, which is also what Taurus is. It's where the emotions rest, because Taurus is the most stable sign. But again, those first degrees of Taurus is a nakshatra that's called the cutter, which is ruled by the god Agni, who is the god of fire. And so when we can relax, then the fire comes and burns all of that attachment, all of that longing. Because the real sort of difficult quality of the moon, it's right in the text, is that it creates longing. The moon it says it's lovesick. The moon is where we're longing, and we're longing for something. You're longing for something. You're always longing for something. And your longings are related to things of this world. Longing to be loved by that man or that woman, or longing to feel like, oh, will people love me? Oh, longing. But what you're really longing for, of course, is a union with your true self. And the moon is the part of us that feels the pain of that separation from God, so to speak, that pain of separation from the Atman, because you are the Atman. You are not the emotions. And the moon is the feeling of being alive and being separate from the Atman. That's what the moon is. That's what your emotions are. Your emotions are your that true love in your heart, which is your true nature. You're longing to merge with that pure love, but it's that pure love mixed with your desires. That's what emotions are. That pure love in your heart mixed with your desire to get something so that you can merge with it, so that you can feel whole. We're all trying to feel whole. So again, think of how much of your life revolves around this, right? Like all of it. And not just you, obviously me too. I'm talking to myself. I'm in this with you. It's never just lecture. We all want to feel good. And so again, but we're attached to the story. And when the moon is exalted in Taurus, but in the nakshatra of Kritikka especially, there's both that stability and that peace and that relaxation. Because you know what we need to do? You know what you need to do? We all need to do? Just relax. 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 Talk about it all the time. Surrender. Relax. This is why it's the most, really in some ways, the most important yoga practice is to relax. We're so worked up. And when you're worked up, you're attached. This is how attachment works. So relaxing, surrendering, and Taurus is the sign of relax. Relax, relax, relax. But it's not relax so much that you fall asleep and that you're lazy. It's relax so much that you can now become aware. Relax so you feel at peace. I said it earlier, the yogic term is santosha. Santosha means contentment. So you're present in the moment with no longing, no restlessness for some future. No, you're totally present and in the moment. This is why yogic practices, all spiritual practices, emphasize things like breath, surrender, relax, because then the clarity, then what happens is the pure feeling in your heart emerges. It's always there. It's just covered up by all of the desires and the longing. It's still there, though. And again, that's why there's restlessness, because you're on the surface of all the desires. And underneath the thing that's restless is that thing that says, but this isn't pure love either. I want to feel whole. I want to feel the purity of the heart, not the substitute that just goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Feel good now, I'm going to feel bad later. And we get used to that, but we don't know what's deeper. and what's deeper is found in relaxation. And Taurus is the sign of relaxation and contentment with what we have, which also means that we're not trying to acquire more things or all of that. And then the clarity of Kritikka nakshatra and the cutter comes in and cuts off all of that longing, so that we're not so much in longing. So as you start to see in the days, whoops, this is hours. Let me go, like, for example, as we get to be around, let's say the 16th, 17th, 18th, even the 19th, 20th, from the 16th to about the 19th or 20th, you'll really start to feel that surrender and that relaxation coming. Now, again, you might start to feel stress, and it will show you the need to relax. One second. But really, the highest promise of that full moon in Taurus is going to be shown in your capacity to relax, be present, and you'll see the beauty and the power in that. Now, again, these eclipses, this eclipse in Taurus is opposite the sun in Scorpio, right? So again, we have all these planets moving through Scorpio, and Scorpio is a sign where we're not relaxed. Of this axis is you have the sign that's the most relaxed, which is Taurus, and it's opposite the sign that's the least relaxed, which is Scorpio. Doesn't mean again, if you're a Scorpio person, relax. No, I'm just saying that sign has other great virtues, particularly when they're devoted to something. There's a lot of devotion in Scorpio, and eventually Scorpio can really learn to relax very well once they connect with something that's transcendent. But the nature of just the general vibration of the sign is to be restless. This is why the moon is debilitated there, because it's emotional restlessness in Scorpio. Again, it's opposite Taurus, where instead of feeling content and peaceful and present in Taurus with what we have, again, that's kind of the default nature of Taurus. But the problem with Taurus is we can then just get stuck in just enjoying whatever we have. Again, opposite that is Scorpio, where it's almost like we're never content with anything because I'm not connected to the heart. I'm not connected to the heart. I'm restless. Let me do this thing, that thing. And it becomes very personal and very emotional, and try to do things to get that response. And again, it can get really difficult because, Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is actually pretty peaceful for the most part, wanting peace and have things be, again, stable. The easiest way to be peaceful is to be very cooperative with other people, for example. And that's the nature of Venus. Mars is the ruler of Scorpio, again, totally opposite, where the kind of default vibration is, I'm right, you're wrong. What did you do? It's like this restlessness to try to find that emotional connection that I just talked about with the moon, but it's very restless, trying to force it, trying to, it's an aggressive sign. It's ruled by Mars. So again, the sun will be there. So shortly before we have the eclipse, again, you see the sun moves into Scorpio on the 16th. It's very quick that we get the eclipse. And again, you have to understand, this is at the exact exaltation degree. The sun is exalted at like 3 degrees of Taurus. That's exactly where the eclipse is happening, right? So it's really prominent in that sense to really be able to see. So what this means is that you'll feel that restlessness from the sun Ketu in Scorpio. You'll feel the restlessness of the sun Ketu in Scorpio. But the moon will be in Taurus, where it's like, but I'm settled. I'm calm, and I feel all of that restlessness, but I can see through it. You can cut through it. You can cut through it and go, oh yeah, I'm beyond that. I'm beyond the emotions and all of the attachment. Again, it doesn't mean you're suppressing. It doesn't mean you're judging and all of that stuff. God, if we ever talk about, well, what's wrong with emotion? People get so protective of their emotional attachments. It's like, It's really great though to be able to feel the emotions, but to also be able to not be triggered by them. And what happens is that same energy then goes into devotion, goes into that transcendent state that I'm talking about, which is beyond emotion. It becomes devotion, where you have compassion and empathy, and instead of just getting triggered and spinning out on a bunch of stories and a bunch of because again, this is the problem where Scorpio can get out of hand, where we feel separate from ourselves. And then again, the first thing we start doing is look to blame others for it, blame the relationship we're in, blame our friends. We literally start blaming all the people around us who we care about. This is what Scorpio can do, because that's where all the attachments are. That's where all the vulnerability is. And Scorpio is that sign of vulnerability. And that's where we feel the most, where we feel the most vulnerable and also the most triggered, right? So again, instead of that, I'm upset because I don't feel connected to my heart because of you, or whatever it might be. See through that and have compassion for that, for ourselves or others or whatever, on that lunar eclipse. But know that the sun's just gone into Scorpio with Ketu, and the solar eclipse is coming. So we'll run this forward again, then 2 weeks later, pretty much. This is on December 3rd, you see. On December 3rd, now, this is when we'll have the solar eclipse, because now the sun and moon are joined in Scorpio. They're joined Ketu, the south node, in Jyeshta Nakshatra, excuse me. And again, so now, but in this case, the moon is debilitated, so this one could be much harder. We go from an exalted, very highly exalted lunar eclipse in Taurus to a debilitated solar eclipse in Scorpio. Now, again, a few things are really strong. For example, Ketu is very strong in Scorpio. And what happens, you see Mars is at 29-28. Literally hours after the eclipse, Mars enters Scorpio. You see the eclipse just sort of passed here, but then Mars goes in shortly thereafter, kind of sort of the day after, or right around that time. Mars is at the very last degrees of Libra at that time. But this eclipse should be a little more intense, because again, you also see, let me back this up day. You also see that the moon is going to hit Mars a couple days before. So the eclipse was on December 3rd, December 1st, boom, we have moon Mars in Libra. So again, be careful of relationships blowing up. Again, Mars is in Libra, and it's going to be until early December, until, as you just saw, December 3rd. So December 1st, as you see, we have Sun Ketu in Scorpio. Mercury is also there. Mercury is not so great here in Scorpio, especially with Ketu, because, again, we can start to use Mercury energy as a way to kind of spin these stories. This is what happens. Mercury is about creating stories around things and what things mean and interpreting them. When he's in Scorpio, it often becomes the dark, difficult story of what people did to us or something like that. Again, Mercury, that's not all that happens. Mercury in Scorpio also is good for investigating, using your rational mind to figure things out in a deeper way and to unravel those difficult stories. But it can also mean where we create them and we cooperate, like, oh yeah, now I get it. And Mercury goes there, and instead of being in diplomatic and peace-loving Libra, where Mercury is trying to create that story, oh, okay, it wasn't such a big deal. Okay, He goes into Scorpio, where it was a big deal. Now I get it. You did this, and it can get into that kind of mindset. So we got to be careful of that. But again, by this time, Mercury's been in Scorpio for a while. But again, so as we're leading up to this eclipse, these couple days before, early December, be careful, because again, Moon Mars in Libra, any Moon Mars conjunction is always, we can be kind of a flashpoint. On the 1st, on the 2nd, it's like exact. December 2nd, this is the day before the solar eclipse in Scorpio. By the way, you have to understand, this is what's called Ucha Bala, which means that The moon has very high Uchabala when it's up near its exaltation point. It doesn't have to be in the exalted sign to have very low Uchabala, which means that it's very close to its debilitated placement. In fact, here at 29 on the 2nd, this is the day when it's going to pass through its exact debilitated placement, because it's debilitated at 3 degrees Scorpio, exactly opposite where it was exalted. So on the 2nd, again, the moon is very difficult here. It's at its lowest dignity. It's very dark, and it's joined Mars. Not much to cheer about here. So again, what this means is you have to be careful getting triggered. All the stuff I said at the beginning about the moon and how, or this and that, this could be like, moon triggering, attachment, anger, frustration, projected onto others 101, right before this solar eclipse. Okay, it's kind of like very much right at that point. And so again, that's why I said these eclipses are like a study in extremes. One is highly exalted, so we can really see through that mental and emotional habit, because also the moon is very bright. So the moon is very bright, it's full. The eclipse can really show where we can expand our perceptions. But then 2 weeks later, it's really dark, which is a main source of weakness for the moon. It's in its debilitated place. It's joined Mars, which is easily the most disruptive influence on the moon. I think even more than Saturn to some extent, at least disruptive with blowing things up and with other people. Moon Saturn can be very disruptive to ourselves because we can get depressed and all like that. But as far as like confrontation, conflict, all that, Moon Mars is really where things can blow up for sure. Moon Saturn, we would go off and be depressed. Moon Mars, we're like, oh no, you got to answer to me now. So expect that some things might get kind of a flashpoint in early December, right? This is no game. So again, that's December 2nd. Then December 3rd, we're right in the eclipse here. And it's in Jyeshta Nakshatra. Jyeshta is ruled by Lord Indra. And Indra is the one who is, he was the king of the gods. Particularly back in the Vedas, he was very much an exalted leader, right? And he was much more revered. In later texts, especially what are called the Puranic texts, well, the ones with like, Shiva and his family and Krishna and all them, Indra was a little bit more of a kind of clownish, foolish king who was always getting into battles with demons and losing the kingdom and all that. So he got turned into a different figure, but it's a similar kind of energy where he's a leader and he really kind of shows how we use power. Definitely, I would say one thing to understand is when we get this early December could be very important, like political, like there could be a very important political, blow-ups and difficulties, especially considering that our president has this Ketu is right on his natal planets. He might even have a major health issue or a major problem happen around this time. We'll look at that a little closer, but Jyeshta especially is related to politicians. Our previous president had Ketu moon exact conjunction in Jyeshta. And so again, we see a lot of politicians, political figures, given how stressed and difficult this is. And in fact, the previous president might also have a major problem around this time, because this is exact return in his chart. He's got Ketu moon in Jyeshta, and this is an eclipse there. The same one last year, by the way. And when this happened last year, this was the day that the Electoral College sealed his legal defeat. It happened on the same day. And by the way, there were people who were saying that was going to be the day that they realized that it was stolen and all this stuff, which I never saw that, because it's debilitated planets. People that were predicting that was going to be the day that he would be vindicated were just seeing through the eyes of their bias, because you can't predict that debilitated eclipse is going to deliver you the great victory. It's impossible to say, particularly when it's what's called a recurrence transit. So it didn't. That was the thing that really sunk him. Before then, there was this hope that there would find some corruption or something. Of course, none of it was found. And that was the day when they voted all around the world, all around the country to say, no, these are the statewide election results. So this is a recurrence transit for him. So this could be very hard for him. And I'm also talking about health. So, but again, aside from those mundane ideas, for us, again, think back to that day last year, by the way. Remember how on needles and pins everyone was about what was happening with the election? Like, this is the day. Are these state houses going to actually verify and validate the results or not? Remember how stressed out we felt about that? Well, that happened on the day when the K2, there was the same eclipse. It was actually even also in Jyeshta Nakshatra. So it was kind of like, it's almost like how that felt. Remember how nervous everybody was. So it's this kind of energy again. So we can expect this kind of difference, right? So again, there's enormous benefit though here and potential in finding those deeper qualities of Lord Indra, who, as I said, was a great king in the Vedas. And in fact, even in yoga tradition, we have what are called the karma indriyas and the jnana indriyas, which are the great powers. We have the senses and the elements, and then the karma indriyas and the jnana indriyas. Indriyas means the great powers of the faculties that allows us to grow and assert ourselves into existence. Again, that's really the way to look at Indra as the king of the power. He's the one who had the power. He was the king, and the king is the king. But what you have to be careful of is not being a corrupt king. Again, we even hear the word king now, and we assume it's corrupt, and it's not. Lord Krishna was a king. Lord Rama was a king. Back in the day, a king was someone who was virtuous and who had the power. And again, you have to understand, you have the power in you. You are powerful. And so anytime we see connections to Indra or to Jyeshta, it shows the real power, the real source of power, the real source of courage. And again, because we're not living in accordance with Dharma and truth, and we don't really know ourselves, that means we also don't know our true power. We live through our ego, and then we try to assert some kind of egoistic power. This is why Jyeshta is often an ego. When people have a lot of planets in Jyeshta, it's their ego trying to overpower others or get into power struggles with others or do that. This is why, as I said in later Puranas, Indra was kind of like a buffoon who was always ruining and almost destroying the kingdom because he would get baited into some stupid argument with an asura and he would bet the kingdom and lose. And then Shiva would have to come out of meditation and give birth to a son to like win the kingdom back, or all kinds of stuff would have to happen. But the early stories of Indra, actually from the Vedas, has a lot to do with that power of and that courage of Scorpio, which is where Indra actually saved the universe, saved the earth by allowing himself to be swallowed by the serpent who stole all the water. Serpent came, Vritra he was called, and he came and stole all the water from the earth. There was no water, and Indra had to go do battle with him. And so what he did is he allowed himself to be swallowed. So he allowed the serpent to swallow him, and then he cut a hole in his belly. And after he was swallowed, he went down and then cut a hole in his belly and returned all the water to the earth. So in many ways, Indra shows that emotional courage of Scorpio, which is really the power of Scorpio, is that courage to transform all of that emotional vulnerability, because we all have it. We all have this restlessness and this fear that we're not going to merge with our true heart. And that's what creates the restlessness of Scorpio. This is why I said when Scorpio becomes devoted to something and becomes devotional and not just driven by desires, then it's very spiritual, very devotional, very much about bhakti yoga. Again, especially in the nakshatra of Anuradha, is very devotional. And in Indra, it's very courageous. Or I'm sorry, in Jyeshta, the nakshatra, it's very courageous. Emotional courage of Scorpio is shown through nakshatra of Jyeshta. And that story really shows it, because Indra was swallowed by the demon, by the serpent, and then he cut his hole in the belly to return all the water to the earth. So he's a great hero in the Vedas, a symbol of courage and the willingness to even die to save humanity. By the way, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm trashing on Scorpio, because Scorpio is a very powerful sign where extreme devotion, very aligned with trying to help others healing the pain they see in others, because they feel the pain very deeply themselves. So they try to be great healer. They're on a quest to heal themselves often in that emotional discomfort and stress and strain. And at the same time, though, they spend most of their time trying to help and trying to heal others as well. And they have enormous emotional courage to try to heal others, where some people like, I don't want to do that. I'm scared to try to heal that person. The Scorpio is like, I'll do it, right? They have enormous courage, and they won't run away from that. And they're very loyal. They'll hang in there with you, even if you're down to your last whatever. So again, I wasn't trying to minimize the sign or that energy. It's enormous greatness there. Again, the difficulty, though, is in the behavior. That's why I was saying, like, the behavior of Taurus, because it's ruled by Venus, its default tendency is to be kind of very stable. But they can then just get stuck. They need more of that Scorpio restlessness, whereas Scorpio tends to be restless. They need more of the stability. And by the way, this is just a key to the entire zodiac. I've done a lot of teaching on these principles of how we need to balance these things. And one of the things that happens on full and new moons, and especially eclipses, is it brings out these dualities, this duality. This is the Taurus-Scorpio duality. And wherever the lunar nodes are in the sky at any given time, that axis is being kind of worked on with all of us. So Rahu and Ketu went into Taurus and Scorpio last September. And so since last September, we've all been working on this Rahu and Taurus, Ketu and Scorpio dynamic. And by the way, both nodes are powerful here. Rahu is really powerful in Scorpio. He's even said to be exalted there. I'm sorry, Rahu in Taurus is said to be exalted. Ketu is said to be exalted in Scorpio. And so this has shown the way we're, been working through a lot of this dynamic in the last, year and a couple months. So this, again, there's a lot of spiritual and cosmic growth that's going on now. And I should say, though, particularly the eclipse full moon on the 18th, if that was the date, 18th, that one is going to be, again, very powerful. It's going to create a lot of that restlessness, like all eclipses do, all lunar eclipses. We're going to be filled with our loony, we're going to be Looney Tunes like we are on full moons, particularly lunar eclipses. But the stability of Taurus and the cutting illumination of fire and the god Agni helps us cut through the attachments, right? Helps us rest in our true nature, be peaceful and calm, and have clarity so that we can cut through the attachments. So that lunar eclipse on the 18th, it was, right? Yeah, 18th. 18th at night, right? Yeah, so you see it's like, we'll have that quality, but then two weeks later, especially as we get in early December, December 1st, Moon Mars, December 2nd, they're like exact, see these hours. And then and then the next day on the eclipse, now the moon is in dark. Now, now its dignity is low. It's not bright. It's joined K2. It's joined the sun. So expect that sort of triggering to be pretty difficult around that solar eclipse. But again, the power here, though, is that power of Scorpio, that power to have the emotional courage to see beyond all of the triggering, what happens on all new moons, but particularly if it's near the node, is the same thing that I said before, is that we have this, the node takes us into another loka, into another dimension. But now, instead of it being an emotional one where the exalted moon was about feelings, this is really about the sun being eclipsed, and the sun is literally that power, but it's often the false power that we have. So in this case, the sun in Scorpio, in Jyeshta, is showing where instead of identifying with that counterfeit version of power that you have, that limited power that you have through your body and your power struggles with other people, and this is me, which is a false sun, that's the sun with the shadow. Remember, I said at the beginning, if you were watching from the beginning, that the sun is the Atman, which is your connection to the sun is your connection to yourself as an Atman, which doesn't have a shadow. It's transcendent. It's beyond incarnation. You incarnate with karma, and then the sun and the moon and the body and all of the attachment to your limited power becomes the obstacle to you understanding yourself as an Atman. So when we get to this point here, where when the sun is eclipsed, that counterfeit version of your power is what's getting eclipsed. That's what's getting eclipsed. The mind is getting burned up. The emotions are getting burned up. So your emotions feel like hell. They feel terrible. You're not going to feel good. It's debilitated moon. It just passed through Mars. Mars is making you frustrated and angry with everybody. So don't do anything about it. Just sit with it. It's not their fault. It's because you think you're this thing, and you think they did something to you, and you're going to extract a pound of flesh from them for it, and all. That's your ego, because you're not this, they're not that, and you're not all these emotions. You're this being of pure love. Okay, so even if it doesn't feel like any of that, and it's just intellectual, it doesn't matter. You're going to feel restless emotionally. Let it be that. You're going to get frustrated. Let the mind just get burned up. It's going to get burned up in Libra with Mars. It's going to go into Scorpio. It's just not going to feel good to be all, here I am, my emotional, joyful self. And that ain't going to be feeling so good. If you don't know yourself beyond that, then it's hard. If you do know yourself beyond that, which means you have actual spiritual practices, you actually do things like yoga and meditation and breath and all that, and you know yourself beyond all of that, and you actually like it, it's really, really kind of cool, because you don't feel like bothering with anybody. They don't feel like bothering with you. You don't have any guilt about it. You don't have anything. You're like, the hell with it. I'm just going to sit here and just go into all of that. That's what Scorpio is about. Scorpio lives in holes, goes down in its hole. Here I am in my hole. I don't need anything else. I feel whole in my hole. I have the courage to be completely nobody, nothing. I'm nothing. You're like, well, how is that the sun? Because what it's saying is that until you become a zero, what does Amma say? She says, you have to become a zero to become a hero. It's sort of corny, but it means the part of you that feels like nothing is the ego. And until your ego is nothing, you're going to be just triggered and going through the whole false power game. So again, every new moon has this promise. Every new moon. Every K14, which is the last, every Krishna Paksha 14th Tithi is called Shivaratri for a reason, because it's the day before the new moon. Every K14 is called Shivaratri because we're supposed to turn away, and then every new moon is called Amavasya, and we're supposed to reconnect and rejuvenate. We're supposed to do it every month. When we have eclipses, it becomes even more powerful. And when we have it here with the moon being debilitated, then you're going to be feeling it. So we'll leave it at that. Gayatri said, meditation and breath work is amazing for restlessness. Well, it's amazing for it, and it's also because it's impossible to be restless when you're breathing properly. It's literally impossible. Like, you can't be angry and be breathing deep and surrendering. It's impossible. Breath, the mind follows the breath. So again, the greatness of these things, we can always talk about these astrological transits and whatnot based on how they feel and how it's going to be, how things are going to, again, be feeling to us, and different possibilities and what's going on. But as always, spiritual practices, they're not transcendent. Like, they don't transcend all of this. But what they do is they bring consciousness to it and focus, and allow us to focus and really get the essence of what the power is that's going on. So again, we're talking about this on the level of the eclipses, but really that's because, especially when we have eclipses, energies really concentrate. And because we don't know how to concentrate, because we're not gathered, because our sun, moon, ego, identity is so wackadoodle, it's all over the place most of the time. We kind of notice it, but when things get like that, when all these things kind of converge and come together, particularly with, in this case, where it's a difficult dignity, or even when it's a good dignity of the moon, again, these are portals that really open up. If there's anything like an astrological portal, it's eclipses. Because literally the sun, moon, and earth are converging at the same point. And again, I know you hear the words like, okay, what's the big deal? The big deal is that it's these three bodies that have nothing to do with each other, just moving. And again, imagine if you were to stand here and there's this other thing that's moving arbitrary, like a car that just keeps driving, and then another thing that's going like this, just keeps moving. And for a brief second, all three of those things just line up. Like, what are the chances of this happening? Again, we're acclimated to this everyday kind of miracle that happens, but it's not happenstance. And by the way, this also allows us to perceive the other incredible miracle, which is that the sun and the moon that the sun and the moon look exactly the same size from where we are. Have you ever pondered that and how that happens? Well, I talk about it in my first book, in my book, Yoga and Vedic Astrology, and the number 108. The reason the sun and the moon look exactly the same size to us is because of the number 108. There's 108 sun diameters between us and the sun, closer to 109, but it's about 108, and 108 moon diameters between us and the moon. So from our point of view, they look exactly the same. What are the chances that these two arbitrary bodies would are exactly the same size from where we are? Again, you're like, well, what's the big deal? What do you mean, what's the big deal? Can you think of any other example of that? So not only do they line up, but they line up perfectly where one fits right in the disk of the other. And it took billions of years for this to happen. Just like it took billions of years for us to evolve to be able to perceive it. So those are a little deeper, and students that have studied with me have heard me talk about these things. Those who haven't should. No, so we'll leave it at that. And I hope this was helpful for everybody to hear. And I'll drop the link one more time if you're interested in hearing me talk about this as part of other astrological placements for the end of the year. That's a free web class that you can look at, endoftheyearastrology.com, and you can see how that works. So everybody take care. Have a